So welcome. We'll go ahead and get started. I'm Dr. Susan Thompson. I am a licensed professional counselor. I'll tell you a little bit more here in a minute. Just for those who maybe have just come in, I totally underestimated the number of handouts, so I apologize that you won't have them, but I am going to post the PowerPoints on, I have a YouTube channel. That sounds kind of funny to say that, but it's really easy to set up. If you have Gmail, you get a YouTube channel, so it's not hard. And I'm also video recording this session, so that if you know somebody who wants the information, they have access to it as well. So, welcome. And let's see here. I also have business cards that I can pass around. I'll put them there, and if you don't get them right away, then you can get them in a little bit. So, is this going forward? There. Whoops, it went twice. I've actually had my LPC since 96, 97. It feels like a long time ago, and I guess it was. I've also been providing LPC supervision since 98. So, and I still provide LPC supervision. So I try and stay up to date on the information that the LPC board puts out. And I guess I need to make a disclaimer. I am not of the board, for the board, a member of the board. So I want you to know that the LPC board does change information yearly. And what I may be telling you now could change when you start doing some research and investigating. So I'm telling you information that is good for now. And then I'll tell you a little bit about what's happened over the years since I've been providing supervision, if that would be helpful. I'm also in private practice. Actually, it's a brand new practice, military integrative therapies. I think that that's in the listing. Started not even a year ago, practicing out of Virginia Beach. And through my practice, I provide LPC supervision. I right now have actually 2 supervision groups, and I supervise a couple of folks individually. And over the years, I've provided supervision to school counselors as well. So I just need to express some gratitude to Tracy Jackson, because she actually asked me to do this presentation because I think she knew that there were a lot of people who were interested. So thank you for showing your interest. Let's see here. I also do some consulting work. Ironically, and maybe it's not ironically, but my specialty is actually working with adults, not kids. I love kids. I have school counselor friends. In fact, I'm doing a presentation a little bit later today on mindfulness in school counseling. So my intention is to give you some broad brushstrokes and also some specifics. To give you an idea of some of the requirements and how do you get there as well. Is that what you're kind of wanting? I'm hoping that's what you're wanting. Good. Because inevitably, every year, every time I start supervision with someone, it's about 6 months into the process, folks look back over the paperwork and say, I really don't know what I'm doing. So if you look at the paperwork and the application, and if you've done that, you probably look at and say, oh my, I don't even know how to make heads or tails of this. And part of that is that the application isn't even in order. It's not in the order that you would fill out all of the paperwork. So I'm going to go in order, and I'll make reference to the current pages so that you have that information. How about that? So we'll talk about first steps in the process, and also what you'll want to be looking for. Some of the forms to complete as well. The new regulations and the new application came out this July 3rd. Why July 3rd? I don't know. Usually the board updates their information in September or August or November, but for the first time it was in July, and they don't usually give us advance notice that they're doing that, so you just kind of find out. So just know that, and it's a good idea to check periodically in your process as well. So the first thing is to go to the LPC board website, and it's the Board of Professional Counseling, Board of Health Professions. But if you type in Licensed Professional Counselor Virginia, you'll get to that website. And remember I said it doesn't start, it's not in order. You start filling out pages 12 and 13 as part of the application. Some of that's because, because there's a lot of information at the very beginning that tells you coursework that you need to have, and also some different pieces of information that you need to gather. Usually it takes a little bit of time to even file the application. So if this is something that you're wanting to do, allow yourself some really good lead time. Because not only does it take some time for you to fill out the application, it takes time for the board to approve it. And if there are any glitches or any missing pieces of information, and I'm sure you've had this happen before, then it just takes longer. So the next thing you'll want to make sure to get is the verification of internship. In the past it was 3 pages, they've narrowed it down to 1 page now. Yay! And so you'll need to contact the institution where you got your internship and have that documented. So here's the good news. The good news is that as school counselors, you don't have to prove that you've done a mental health counseling internship. An internship is an internship is an internship. So that's good news, right?
So
if
like
you,
the internship we did when we were
in
grad
graduate school,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
So, so I'm looking around and I'm thinking, there might be a few of you who it's been a while since you since you finished. So you'll really need to see what kind of paperwork you have that can document that you've completed all your internship. I should tell you that I am a former faculty member, full-time faculty member, and the clinical coordinator for ODU's graduate counseling program. So I've stood in both worlds, from the academic standpoint as well as the providing supervision out there standpoint. And would any of you like to have a seat over here, or you're welcome to? You're starting to be standing room only. And what I would tell my students is save everything. All of your syllabi, all of your documentation for internship. So the good news at this point is that you only have to have someone from the university fill out the paperwork, and it's 1 page. So your transcripts and what the institution indicates for the number of hours that you got for your internship should be fine. It should be. Now, again, I'm not a representative of the board, so I can't guarantee that. It used to be that you would have to go back to your supervisor from your internship. And again, I'm looking at some of you. I don't even remember who that was. So you don't have to have that now. You just have to have documentation from your institution.
So a transcript would be...
Well, you're going to have to also provide a transcript to the board, because they're going to evaluate your transcript according to the coursework that you need to also have. But your first, this is one of those things that can be a sticking point, and that's why I'm telling you up front that's one of the things you're going to have to do, because you have to have that document as part of your application packet. You can't have it all come in one at a time. It has to come in all at the same time. So if you're interested, if that's something that you want to do, even if it's like next year or the year after, get that document, because it's in the application packet. You'll also need to have a supervisor, and I would suggest that you start with someone who's already approved. The board requires a supervisor to have 1 class in supervision or 60 credit hours. 60 CEUs. Back that up. 20 CEUs in supervision in order to provide supervision. They also have to have at least 2 years license work before they can start providing supervision. So what I would say is you probably don't want somebody to start out with who's never provided supervision before, because you want to be coached through the process. You really need to have somebody who's done this before or is currently doing it. Because the other piece is that the board has to approve that person. That person has to submit proof that they have the continuing education or coursework in supervision. Questions? So there's also a coursework form in the application. So if you take your transcript, and you'll need to line up, and you have to do that. You can't have the board say, oh, this course looks like it's group. You have to do that. And if it doesn't match up title-wise, that's where, if you've gone to an institution that doesn't typically have folks applying to the board, to the LPC process, you'll have to probably supply a syllabus. Right. So there's a reason that not everybody gets licensed, because this is like multiple hoops that you have to jump through in order to get it done. But I have to tell you, I think it's worth it. Okay. Yes.
For the job description,
Oh, thank you. I will cover this also later, because
I'm seeing school counselors who go through this process,
right.
And then their job description would be school counseling.
Right. So as long as you have a job description, a job title that says that you're a counselor, that helps. Now, here's one of the changes that's happened recently with the application process. They're very clear that the LPC is preparation to be in private practice. Okay. So they're looking for job descriptions that have, you are doing diagnosis, treatment planning, and clinical application. Okay. Mental health work. So if your job description doesn't have that in it, then I actually had somebody contact me just yesterday, day before, who's a school counselor, and she's running into some problems. She's in Norfolk, and is saying, I don't know about with it. She's tried all kinds of things to see if she can do another internship in order to get a supervisor, and this is the tricky part. I believe that your school counseling experience really supports what we're doing. The difference is that often school counselors don't have that diagnosis, treatment planning pieces in there. In fact, in our program, in ODU's program, school counselors left and say, well, I'm not supposed to be diagnosing, I'm not supposed to be doing this. And I understand that. So my recommendation is, and I know this is hard, is to find a place where you can volunteer in exchange for supervision. That's one possibility. And it's the nonprofit organizations, the charities, that frequently will do some kind of exchange. So, like, for example, Catholic Charities. In our area, it's the Up Center, also United Methodist Family Services. So any of the charities typically may, and I'll say may, offer this exchange. You have to see this number of clients for an hour of supervision. Yes and yes.
What if you worked as a QMHP?
If you are working, so this is the other thing. If you are, it has to be current. Your supervision has to be current. Not, you can't count the hours that you've already done. I'm sorry, if you have 15 years of experience, you still have to have supervised experience while you are working. So if you have a part-time position where you're doing QMHP work, does everybody know what QMHP is? Some people do. It's Qualified Mental Health Professional. And by the way, everyone in this room qualifies because you have a master's degree. Okay. So that's the good news on that. QMHPs are typically used in in-home services because they're providing clinical work, and the organization is billing for it. So that's another option for you, to pick up a client or two that's in-home, or residential treatment or something like that, where you have that clinical application aspect. Yes.
Would it make sense to send in your, let's say, school counseling job description? So technically you're working, 37.5 hours a week technically. If you send that in, as well as state that you're going to be volunteering 8 hours a week for the specific diagnosis and treatment, are they typically going to count those hours with it?
For both, they'll count both.
They'll count both, I mean.
They have in the past, so I'll just say they have in the past. Past isn't always a predictor of the future, however. That's what I would say. I think that's your strongest bet. So yeah, that's that. You doing some bridge work as you're thinking about and planning for transitioning from school counseling to.
So when I did start filling out this application, do you put, for the place of supervision, I would put my school and then the clinic that I would be working at?
That's the employment.
Employment, right.
Right. So I provided off-site supervision since I've been a supervisor.
Okay.
And so that adds another element. And that's why I've been a supervisor since '98. And I've had approval ever since. I took a course in supervision when I was in my doc program, so that was easy. And I've been providing supervision all along. So you need to have registered your supervisor as well. So it's that the jobs, the registration of supervisor, the application, all of that is a piece of the application. Is that what you were asking?
Yes.
Okay. So regulations, let's look at the educational requirements. How many of you graduated from a 36-hour program? Good. 48-hour program. 60-hour program? Awesome.
Yeah.
So typically if you graduate from a 60-hour program, you've got almost all of these. The ones that school counselors don't typically have is abnormal or diagnosis and treatment planning. So you will have to go back and get that class, and you'll have to do it before you apply. In the past, until a couple years ago, you didn't have to have completed all your coursework in order to submit your application. Now you do. So, professional counseling identity, check. Series of counseling and psychotherapy techniques, all of these are core courses in the program. Human growth and development, check. Group counseling and psychotherapy, check. All of that. Career counseling, check. Right? Appraisal, evaluation, and diagnostic procedures, that's that diagnosis and treatment planning class. Abnormal, actually that's not true. That's the research class or the testing class that we get, right? Number 7 is the testing class. 8 is that abnormal behavior. That's the diagnosis and treatment planning related class. So if it's either abnormal behavior or diagnosis and treatment planning, that's acceptable. Multicultural counseling, check. Research, check. All of those are core. Diagnosis and treatment of addictive disorders. So that's another course that you may not end up having. That's pretty new, the addictions, last 5 years or so. Marriage and family systems, you may or may not have something like that. And then the internship. So a minimum of 600 hours of internship, where 240 is face-to-face. So if you have graduated from an accredited program, K-Prep or otherwise, you have this. You have most of this. Yay! Especially that internship. So that's that. There's some good news in all of this. Will eating disorders, that's a specific course. That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to that. That would be something that the board would have to say. So the question was, would a class in eating disorders actually count for that? And I don't really know the answer to that. I think that they're looking for something that's really broad application of addictive disorders. But I think it's worth a try. So the internship, 600 hours, 240 face-to-face. Now, this is a little bit of a shift. It used to be that they would say you have to have, you can count up to 900 hours, and that's really what they're saying. You can count, if you had an internship that was up 900 hours, you could count those and deduct those from 4,000 hours of work. This is one of the new changes. The new regulations now, so it used to be also you would deduct the 900 or 600 from 4,000, along with about roughly 40 hours of group and individual supervision while you're in internship. They've done away with that now. I know. However, this is I like to present good news and bad news. So the good news is that they have reduced the total number of work hours from 4,000 to 3,400. They've kept the number of supervision hours the same. It's 200 hours, which is roughly 2 hours a week in a 2-year period. And I'll go over that here in a second. There is an internship form, I mentioned that, and again, it's within the application packet. It's at page 17 in the application packet at this point. 1 page. And you need to have a faculty member from the program sign it. And they put it in, I think, in a sealed envelope. So you'll need to keep track. My secret for filling out forms and putting them in sealed envelopes, and I'm telling you this, is on the front side of the envelope, I write what's in the envelope, what form's in the envelope. So make sure you do that, because it might be a month or two before you've gotten all of these forms collected. So, because you're going to, again, send all of this together to the board. And because I was the one signing these forms, I say, if you're going to provide this for a faculty member to sign, give them everything they need to know. Put it on a Post-it, send it in an email. This is when I started my internship. This is when I ended it. This is when so give them everything, more than what they might need to know, so that they know you know your stuff at this point. You need the starting date of the internship, total direct client contact, and total number of internship hours. Number of individual supervision is, I don't think, is the case at this point. This is a carryover from a previous presentation. All right. If you graduated from ODU, and I see some familiar faces, you're welcome to email me. I have, very conveniently, created a form that has this course belongs with that requirement. So if your program has something like that, ask them for it. If they don't, then maybe you would be willing to create it. I don't know. But that helps folks. So once you've got all this paperwork together, you submitted it, the board will approve it and will say, they send me a scary letter, they send you a scary letter that says that your supervisor is completely and totally responsible for everything you do as a professional. And you start your residency. So some of the terms sound very similar to what medical professionals do. That, I don't know why that is, but it's just what that's what they started to use. So this residency, I mentioned, then your supervisor has to be registered with the board. Your paperwork starts that process. Like I said, 3,400 hours of counseling practice with various populations, clinical problems, and theoretical approaches. That's what the application says. The regulations also say that. 2,000 of those hours need to be direct, face-to-face. Phone is not, the board does not consider phone work right now face-to-face. Although they have made a change in that supervision. It used to be that they required that supervision to be completely face-to-face, and that remote distance supervision didn't count. But that's one of the changes that they've made. So again, there's some good news on that. A minimum of an hour of supervision and up to 4 hours of supervision per 40 hours of work. So if you take a break from supervision, you still have to document that you're getting, you still have, otherwise you can't count any of the hours. You have to be getting the supervision along with while you're working. So again, all of these are as of July 3rd. Yes.
This kind of explained this already, but I just want to be clear.
It's okay. I know, it starts to get like, what? She said, what?
So if you get your supervisor approved, can you get these hours in the school setting, or no? It has to be at some kind of.
I think, and the experience that I've had, is that the work as a school counselor is valid, legitimate counseling work, and that would count as part of that time.
Right.
And remember what I said? I think it's a really good idea if you also get the clinical mental health kind of work, so that that makes sure that you have that preparation toward doing private practice with 1-2. Yes.
I emailed the board because I wasn't sure. I heard so many rumors like about school counseling. Does it count? Does it not? And when I emailed them, they said to send the job description. And then I found out there are 2 counselors in Prince William County that, based off of our supervisors, what she wrote, our job description, knowing that people wanted to be going for the LPC, that ours does count. But I think it's county to county. And like I said, when I emailed, they're like, we can't make any decisions. You need to send us the job description. So, I mean, I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that I'm going to do, you know what I mean, what you said as far as, because I want to have that mental health diagnosing piece, because we're not necessarily, you know,
Yeah, you're not supposed to.
be, right, we're not supposed to be diagnosing in
Right,
school. So, but yeah, I think it's kind of like county to county based off of your job description.
Right. So,
Yeah.
was that your question? Okay.
Is there a certain, you mentioned that you could now do remote supervision hours. Is there a certain number of hours it can be remote?
They have not
or-
made that determination.
Okay.
They've not said specifically how many of those. I know I've provided over this last year through Skype, or actually FaceTime is really secure. And now I understand that Google doesn't yet have a secure HIPAA compliant means of doing this kind of work. Yes.
This might be a little silly, but so 3,400 hours of counseling practice, but only 2,000 have to be direct.
Yeah.
So what are the other?
I know. Can you stand it? Because most of your work is direct, isn't it? You don't sit in your office without people coming in. Well, guess what? If you were to do in-home services, about half of your work would be face-to-face. The other half, and you're shaking your head yes, so you've done that work, and you're saying yeah, because you travel, you do paperwork, and more paperwork, and more paperwork, and more paperwork. So that paperwork, anything that's counseling related, like all the preparation that you might do at home, you all work more than 40 hours, don't you?
Yeah.
So just because you only get paid for 37.5 doesn't mean you're just doing 37.5. I know that. So whatever hours you're doing that are preparing you for your work count as work hours because it's counseling related. The way that I say to folks is, in terms of the face-to-face, when you're providing a counseling-related service, you're face-to-face with somebody. So that's counseling. We think of that as counseling, right? Consultation, you do a lot of consultation, don't you?
Yeah.
You're providing consultation, that's a counseling-related service. So consultation is face-to-face. That's direct hours. Now, if you're receiving consultation, that might be something else. Right? A staff meeting, indirect, because you're not providing a counseling-related service. Yes.
What about if you're a therapeutic foster parent? Would those hours count?
I don't know about that. I think it's worth a try. The board will probably say it's not a counseling job. There's not the word counselor in your job description or job title. It used to be, at some point, the board goes back and forth about different things. If you were a case manager, they wouldn't count case manager as work toward licensure, which I think is crazy, because case managers do a lot of counseling. They're just not called counselors. So I certainly made a case for anybody who wanted to take their case management job and count it toward licensure. Other questions? Yeah.
So do you find that people in schools typically count all 37.5 hours?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So some of it can be like, staff meeting or
Absolutely.
meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So just you want to keep track of what's direct and indirect for you. 1, 2. Yeah.
I have a question. I came from Pennsylvania and I was doing outpatient therapy, and I had a supervisor there, but the process is so much easier. You don't have to send even registration in.
Until afterwards. They're
Right.
much. So I want you to know that Virginia was the first state to get licensure for counselors, independent of social workers and anybody else. And so the regulations have really changed. So thankfully, 30 years ago, the people who, and we need to just thank them, because those are the people who took an oral exam. And maybe half of those people passed the oral exam. So that's when you have to prove yourself as a profession. Now we don't have to prove ourselves as much. The regulations have sort of backed off. And there are other states that have learned from us, thankfully. And it used to, so 10 years ago, when I was first providing supervision, Virginia, if you worked for a nonprofit organization, you didn't have to submit your application ahead of time. After you finished all your hours, you could submit it. They started getting into some problems with that, because there were people who got all this work time but really weren't doing counseling. So,
Is it difficult, that was my question, to get hours from out of state? Is that a difficult thing? Have you had any experience with that? Because I had close to 1,000 hours, and then I came down here to get a school counselor, and I was doing all that, so I was just curious.
that kind of speaks to one thing. So one thing is that your supervisor needs to be licensed in the jurisdiction. That's another slide coming up here. In the jurisdiction in which you're going to be licensed. You hear that? So that means your supervisor has to be licensed in Virginia for that to count. Pennsylvania, not so much. North Carolina just started changing their regulations. It used to be I could sign off on the supervision that I was providing for people when they went to North Carolina. That's not the case anymore. Georgia too. But and the answer right now is I don't know, because the board will take somebody who has been licensed in another state, and sometimes they'll they'll just transfer the license, but not always. If you meet all the other requirements, but not always. But you're not finished with Pennsylvania. Right. So I have at other times suggested that you get licensed in the other state, and then transfer your license.
But don't you have to be working for a certain period of time before they make the transfer for you?
I don't know.
I think so.
I don't know. I'm not as up on that part. It is in the application though. All right. Yes.
What if you say you started this process 10 years or so ago, and then life happened, and you kind of let it go, and is all that gone?
Kinda. Now, I don't know. Did everybody hear her question? So, I would write a letter. I would always start with writing a letter and get support from whoever provided your supervision. So that's where I would start. So supervision, they have there is a definition of what they consider supervision. The supervisor is a person who monitors the performance of those who are providing counseling. And it needs to be regular, documented, individual or groups consultation, guidance, instruction with respect to clinical skills. Different supervisors kind of approach this differently. So I said before that the supervision has to be concurrent with the residency. At least half of this is one of those, we now start getting into the if-then. You can get all 200 hours of your supervision individual. You can. The board also says that you can have up to half of your supervision group. You must have at least half of your supervision individual. Does that make sense? See, it makes sense right now. 6 months from now, you're like, I don't really even understand this, but that's okay. I like being a resource, and you can always call me or email me. Yes.
Quick question. It has to be run by because I know before, because when I started the process, and I stopped too early, LCSW could do up to so many hours.
Up to half.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now, I think it still says that at least up to half can be done by someone who's licensed in another field. So an LCSW, a clinical psychologist, a psychiatrist if you're really lucky.
Wait, can you start whatever what now?
Okay.
Sorry.
So this is the May of, okay, you can, up to, so I need to go back, because that's not something that has stuck in my mind. You could count up to half of your supervision with someone who is licensed in another clinically oriented field, like LCS social worker, licensed social worker, a licensed psychologist, and I threw in psychiatrist just to throw you off, but because they don't provide supervision, and they don't have training in supervision either. That the board is starting to phase that out. I really want you to know that the board is starting to phase that out because they believe that we have enough. We're starting to have enough supervisors, people who can provide supervision, who are LPCs.
Where do you find this pool of
LPCs, great. The best website that I would go to, there are two websites I would go to. One is the Virginia Clinical Counselors Association, VSCA, Virginia Clinical Counselors Association. They have a list of supervisors, people who've been providing supervision. That's one of the perks of being a member of that organization, is that you can get listed as a supervisor. All right, so yay. Now I want you to know too that I'm listed with Psychology Today for my practice, and I get to also say that I could provide supervision. So that's where else I would look, because more and more mental health therapists have a little site on Psychology Today, and you might be able to find someone through that.
On Psychology.
On Psychology Today. That's online, so that's psychologytoday.com, and you just go in and find a therapist, and then do a search in your area for someone. Yeah.
Is the cost of supervision listed, or do you have to normally go to each person's?
Everyone's different.
Okay.
So it can range from nothing, free, which is ideal, right? To some people will charge a nominal fee, $30-40, but I want to go back to, they are, the scary letter that they get scares a lot of people from providing supervision. And it can go on up to $125 an hour. I'll tell you what I charge. Would that be helpful? I charge for, right now, $65 for an hour of individual supervision, $65 for 2 hours of group. So bang for your buck on groups, right? Not everybody does it that way though.
And we have to have 200 hours.
And you have to have 200 hours. I know, don't do the math right now, it's probably crazy. Yeah.
I have a question on the supervision. So 100 hours has to be provided by an LPC from
Minimum,
Virginia.
a minimum 100 hours of, by an LPC.
So, and then the other 100 hours so could be by any other
Licensed
professional.
in Virginia. So it has to be in the
Virginia. That was gonna be my
jurisdiction.
question.
Yeah, it
Somebody
says
who's an
very
LPC
clearly in the
DC,
jurisdiction.
It has, that won't work for that.
And I think the rationale for that is that somebody who's in the state should know the regulations.
Right.
Somebody's out of state
Right.
is going to be operating from a different set of regulations.
So to follow on that, on page 11 of the application, it's a form that's for the board of the state where the person who's applying supervisor is.
Wait,
so,
say that again?
So like, if my supervisor is in DC, they fill out this form, I thought.
They would, yeah. And hopefully they're licensed in Virginia as well. Because I think there are people who will be licensed, dual licensed, and folks in the Northern Virginia area may have license in DC as well as Virginia and maybe even Maryland. So they have to be licensed in the state that they're providing the supervision. Where you want to be licensed. So this is for Virginia. So you'll want to make sure to have a supervisor who's licensed in Virginia.
Okay, there's the packet of form on there.
There is a minimum.
I know. So we'll go back. We'll take a look at it. Okay. So individual versus group supervision. Again, the other thing that you want to keep in mind is how many people in your group, because you are also bound by, once you start the process, you are also bound by the regulations. And I'm saying this because I've run across folks who have been in supervision groups where there are 15 or 20 people. And that's not kosher. It's not only not kosher, but folks could get into a lot of trouble documenting that as supervision. Because the board says you can have up to 6 people in a group supervision. And you don't have to have group supervision. It can get convenient though. Because you can, okay. Now, the board also says, you cannot call yourself a professional counselor. You have to call yourself a resident in counseling once you've started the process. You can't represent yourself as an independent provider because you're under supervision. So you need to use your name, initials, and resident and counseling on written communication. So the board's really clear about you need to establish your identity and this evolving identity. And then residents shall not engage, I like this shall, in practice under supervision in any areas for which they have not had appropriate education. I already mentioned this. The supervisor has to have been licensed for 2 years already, and then they have to be able to document that they have had some kind of training in supervision, whether that's a class or 20 continuing ed units. And there's that jurisdiction piece. And here's that explanation. So it means a state, territory, district, province, or country that's granted a professional certificate. So this might lend some confusion then. So I'm good at admitting when I'm wrong. I could be totally wrong about somebody from DC providing supervision for, so that's what you'll want to check out. Does that make sense? Supervision by anyone whose relationship to the resident compromises the objectivity of the supervisor is not a good idea. There have been cases where a spouse has provided supervision to their spouse. Not a good idea for either one of them, because you both lose your license or the ability to practice. The supervisor assumes full responsibility. That's part of that scary letter I've been talking about. And the supervisor also fills out forms. There's a quarterly evaluation that has to be completed, as well as a final evaluation, which is called a verification of residency. The quarterly evaluations are also in the application packet. There have been some changes recently, and I like these changes actually too, because they require folks to keep track of their hours on a quarterly form. So it used to be that didn't happen, you just filled out the form, and by the way, you don't send those in as you go. You hang on to them and you send all of that in at the end. Yes?
Is there a time limit when you have to complete all this stuff? Like if you start the process, is it like within a certain amount of window you have to get all your complete everything, or is it?
I think it is, but it's a well-guarded secret.
Okay.
I don't know how the board decides you've been out of this long enough. That was related to your question, I think.
But
so
like, because even if you're continually getting, and you just do
I know.
only something, so we don't know. Okay.
Yeah, so like this is one of those, I really don't know the answer to that. So it could be that you stop out for a couple of years or something like that. I want you to know that while the way that the regulations are written, if you have a full-time job counseling position and you're getting 2 hours of supervision a week, then you can do all of this in 2 years. Here's the tricky part. Most people don't get 2 hours of supervision a week. So most people take longer. Right? For me, it took me close to 4 years to get my license for that reason, because I could not afford to pay somebody for 2 hours a week. I got lucky at one of my supervisors was free, but others were not.
So
Yeah.
you just said something about one of your supervisors. So can you have different supervisors
Oh,
at
yeah.
different times? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
So for example, I provide off-site supervision. A couple of my supervisees, current supervisees, also get individual supervision that from their site, because their site has said, yes, that's one thing we'll provide for you. But not all sites will do that as part. there are places that are saying we don't want the responsibility, and for community services related organizations, the trade-off is if I provide supervision, I'm not billing, and the organization's not making money. That's the rationale. It's very interesting.
This is gonna sound, but when you say supervision, or just to make sure I have this clear, so this supervisor is sitting with you while you're in session with someone?
No.
Okay, see, that's what, I don't know.
Right.
It's been a
So,
long time since I've been in school.
So, just so that you know what it looks like from my end, my supervisees come to me. I'm an off-site supervisor, so we schedule a time, an hour a week per individual. 2 hours is in my office. So supervision is actually essentially supposed to be talking about cases, talking about treatment, talking about those things that are relevant to your development as a counselor. So the supervision that I provide also includes like personal development. As long as I'm not doing counseling in supervision, because that wouldn't be a good idea either. Then if I'm helping you develop as a counselor, then that's fair game. So different supervisors will do different things. Like if you remember from internship, I don't know, from internship, different schools require different things. Like from internship, you might have had to do some recordings and bring the recordings in to your supervisor on campus. So that's one thing, that's one way that supervision looks like. Other people do, there are a variety of ways that supervision could be done. Okay. Yes.
Well, my question, don't feel silly at all, because that was my question. What does it look like?
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, because I'm trying to
Right,
formulate
it was
figure out in my mind, what does this all look like? So I was imagining direct supervision as I'm working with the client as well. So are you saying that if it turns out that my county's description of what I'm doing in my job is sufficient, then my counseling I'm doing in the school setting is fulfilling all of the counseling hours?
As long as you have a supervisor that's at the same time.
At the same time,
Right.
and it's saying, yeah,
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
I was imagining that I would have to be doing after hours.
Yeah, me too.
Well, your supervision probably will be after hours.
Yeah.
Probably will be after hours.
But I was thinking supervision and then also a counseling arrangement but that's not true.
But didn't that depend upon the description of our job?
Depends on your job.
Because everyone may not write it up appropriately enough to meet the qualifications.
Right.
So I think if we had that example, that'll get everybody over the hump.
So it would help if you are needing to have a job description that's written for the LPC board. The application tells you there are 5 different categories that it says you need to have experience in. It's in the application, it's in the regulations. So you could present that to someone and say, "Do you think you can really help me create this job description that would help meet this?" And we'd start working with folks on that. So, how much time we have? I'm like, really 20 after, that's right. Crikey. The last thing, once you finish with your supervision, you submit a verification of supervision form, you let everything go, and the last thing is that you take the exam, the LPC exam. The best study guide is counselingexam.com, and it's online. It's not a paper and pencil thing, it's online. And it's very clinically oriented, and you have never taken an exam like this before, I promise you.
It's not like the NCE.
It is not like the NCE at all. At all. It is more like the clinical mental health counselor's exam, because it's clinical mental health. The NCE is geared toward counseling in general. This is very specific.
But there are other states that take the NCE.
There are other states that take the NCE.
Almost
right?
every
if you're going,
other state
yes.
actually
So
takes the NCE.
if it's not the NCE, it'll be the National Clinical Mental Health Counselor's Exam. So it's one of those two. And Virginia, by the way, is moving in that direction of the National Clinical Mental Health Counselor exam. Yes.
So, I thought like 2 years ago
It's very different now than it was.
They used to take the NCE and they said as long as you had your NCE certification,
Not for Virginia.
then you didn't have to take
Not for Virginia. It's never been. Virginia has never taken the NCE as their exam. North Carolina has, other states around have, but Virginia has never taken the NCE. I apologize. We're. Oh, and by the way, once you're done, you're not done. Then you have to document continuing ed, but you get a grace period of a year before you have to keep doing that. And anyway, so I said I love being a resource. You are absolutely welcome to get in touch with me. There is a clipboard that was going around. If you would like to be on my email address, I'd be happy to include you and send information. I also have a newsletter that goes out, so just let me know. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.